This is a repeat of the presentation from Thursday night, and what we wanted to do was give junior parents an update on what to expect over the next several months as your student prepares the application process. This is definitely not the beginning of college counseling overall. We use the term college counseling. We usually wait to use that actual term until junior year, but all that we've been doing with your students since freshman year has really been in preparation for this process. Everything from the individual conversations about their personal growth and time management, stress management, being able to manage the course load that they're doing, to course scheduling, working with teachers, checking in on grades. All of that is part of the college counseling model. We just try to avoid the actual term college counseling because at times it brings some undue stress to students. We also recognize that not using the term college counseling can create stress as well because they're wondering, am I on track? Am I doing the right things? Before we get into these slides, it's important for all of your students to know that the real most important thing that they can be doing right now is focusing on their classwork. We cannot redo junior year, and sophomore and junior year are some of the most critical years in the whole college advising process. So we want to make sure that they keep their minds super focused on doing the best they can in the classes that they're in right now. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of what the timeline looks like, we are heading into spring 2019. And this is where it'll get a little bit more heavy on the actual college research and list part. All up until now has been about preparation and making sure the students feel prepared, academically prepared for this college process. But it is in the spring, actually starting this month, that we start meeting with your juniors one-on-one to talk about what senior year looks like in terms of classes, in terms of college lists, in terms of the application process. And for many of your students, this will be the first time that they take their first college admission test, and that would be the SAT or the ACT. They've done practice tests before, including the PSAT, which they do with us both sophomore and junior year. But we ask that they take their first official test in the spring of junior year. I'll have a whole section dedicated to admission testing a little bit later in this presentation. But you can see the process that we'll be going through over the next several months, including summer. And some students are already starting to think about their summer plans before we get into fall, where we actually start filing applications, finalizing that college list. And it continues into the spring, where we do a little bit more work on scholarships and start to really talk about the decisions that they have ahead of them. So right now we're headed into this spring session, and so that will be most of the focus for today's presentation. When we look at the college process overall, it is truly a student-driven process, and it's a really large project management assignment, and it's a journey. It is meant to be fun, as unfun as some students, I apologize for that, as unfun as some students may find it. They might find it stressful. This really is a process of exploration, and it's a time for them to think about what their goals are and what are the things that they want to accomplish in this process. The role of the student is prominent here. We do want students to have skin in the game, and we ask that they be the lead on this project. And they've got some guides on the side, and that includes both the counselor and the parents, because this is a process that does require a little bit of guidance on the side as well. But what we ask of the student is that they really be the lead on the research here and finding best match. And we'll do a little bit of conversation about what best match looks like, both from an academic and financial and social perspective as well. We ask that they understand the application components, and we'll be going into junior classrooms in January to talk a little bit more about college research and the application process. And we'll continue to go into classrooms, and we'll meet with them individually to talk about what that looks like. We require them to be registering for college visits and testing. We just came off of our fall season of hosting college representatives. Typically, we host about 170 plus college reps each fall, some in the spring as well, and juniors are invited to attend both the ones in the fall and the spring. It's a good time to engage with college representatives. They received a list of students that have attended, so that's a really good way for them to demonstrate their interest into a college. We also ask that they be the one that register for exams. Every single student has their own independent College Board login that they should have created by now, since they've taken a PSAT twice. And ACT also maintains their own system. So the school doesn't have access to the College Board account or the ACT account. So it is the student's responsibility to be able to register for those tests within the suggested timelines, and we'll talk about those individually with your students. We assign tasks within Naviance. Naviance Student is their version of the system. It formerly was called Family Connection, but now it's Naviance. Those tasks we ask that they complete by a certain time, and we do give them pretty regular reminders about the tasks that we need. A lot of those tasks are about career exploration, learning styles inventories, and eventually more college matching questions like personality type and other assessments that help them really determine where they want to go and what kinds of things they want to do when they're in college. So we ask that they complete those tasks. At the end of the year, there is a big survey called Junior Survey number 3, which really gets them into a reflective state of this process. We ask them 8 pretty in-depth questions about themselves, their likes, their process, their state of mind, the things that they're proud of. And that's a really helpful reflective process to start the finalizing of the college list in the fall. So we ask that they spend a good deal of time with that towards the end of the school year and into the summer working on that one. Definitely, we ask that they commit to their classes. That's an important part, is sometimes they forget that I'm doing all these college applications, but there's also the need to continue to do your classes as well. So on your schedule, on the student schedule, you'll see their 6 or 7 classes that they have, and you'll see a 0 period counseling class because particularly in the fall for seniors, it is pretty much a class. You're committing anywhere from 1 to 3 hours a week on this task, this project management assignment of applying to college, of completing the essays, of getting all things in line. And so it's necessary that they know that this is in addition to the classes that they should also be committed to. And then timelines are important. Some colleges are a lot more, well, I would say all colleges are sticklers for deadlines. They have a published deadline, and those deadlines apply to the students only. You may see documents from the school trickle in a little bit after the deadline, and that's because teachers and the school are given a little bit more flexibility with those deadlines. But for the student, those deadlines are hard deadlines. So you'll see the earliest deadlines of October 15th. That's a very small handful of schools. You'll see more in early programs on November 1st, a few more November 15th. The California public schools, so that would be the UC and the CSU system, are on November 30th. And then anywhere from December 1st all the way into April are the rest of the the application deadlines. So they are going to need to submit on time. So a lot of information and a lot of roles for the students. So how do we help along with that process? As a counselor, it is our role to really communicate the information that students need to know about in a timely fashion. And we do that through several mediums. We do that through classroom presentations. We have pretty regular communications that are happening in the form of a college newsletter that goes out with increasing frequency starting in the spring for juniors. And then by the fall, it's weekly for them as seniors. So we'll keep them up to date about what they should be working on that week, what they should be focused on, what's coming up. So keeping them updated. We also send individual messages as we know that students are in different places throughout the whole application process. We advise them during their college meetings. So as they're doing their research for college, and we're starting to get a sense of what are the kinds of things that my student likes to or is looking forward to in a college experience or looking forward to studying, we can say, hey, I see you looked at this school, based on what we've discussed, you might consider this school as well. So we do add to the list. We do not create lists for students. That's a really important thing to note. The student really needs to, we give them direction on where they can be looking, and we really like to complement the list that they're doing because we want them to know the most that they can about any school that they're applying to. That will become very, very important when they actually start the application, because the more you know about a school, the more thorough your application will be. So we ask that they do that research, and then we add in schools that might match some of the qualities that they're looking for. We present all of our information within in a timely way, thinking about what their developmental needs and also recognizing that everyone's at a very different stage. So for example, I'm working with my seniors now, and just some of them are just now finalizing their college lists. And that's different from some of the students that were finalizing their list in August. Everyone is at a different space in this process. And what's important is that we not push too hard on getting to a place of you must be here by this date. There are some hard deadlines like the UCCSU, which are November 30th, but besides those systems and besides the public systems, most private schools have deadlines that are either December 1st or somewhere into January, February, March. So just keeping aware of what their needs are. It'll be timely and relevant. And then finally, the school does submit all of the documents, including what's called the secondary school report and written evaluation. And we'll talk more about those a little bit later. Where do you fit in on all this? I think it's really helpful for parents to stay aware of the timelines, and parents do have access to all of the communication that we send to our students within the counseling website. So we keep an archive of all emails that are sent to students, and you as parents can access that at sfhs.com/counseling. So helping maintain those deadlines is helpful. Some families use a calendar that they keep on the refrigerator or somewhere that's easily visible for everyone to know where the student is at on the process. It is helpful, especially as we get into late spring and definitely in the fall, to have maybe a weekly meeting talking about what did your student do the prior week and what are they going to be doing the upcoming week, setting a regular time for that. And that will help if you're able to assist with the maintaining timelines. The next three are really connected: support, communicate, and listen. This is a difficult process for students. Again, I said it's supposed to be exciting, but you know, when you're carrying a 6 to 7 course college preparatory load, some of which may be honors courses, plus sports, plus plays, plus band, all these activities, it can be a stressful process. And we are communicating with students all of the really important deadlines and how to stay on top of all this. So really, parents can help in supporting their students in where they're at and recognizing that, yes, college is a big deal. That's a really big thing. But how can I support you as a parent? What do you need from me? How can I assist? How can I help? As opposed to being really too forceful on it. It's a gentle balance that you have to maintain there. Part of that is communicating what your expectations are really early on. Saying, you know, I expect that you are committing this amount of time to these apps every week, or these are our expectations for college overall. This is what we're open to, having those conversations pretty openly. And then listening for their concerns. I mean, you know your students best. You see them every day. And if you sense that it's getting a little overwhelming, listen to what their concerns are. Listen to what their fears are. It's this process of reflection. It's tough. We're asking 17-year-olds to do something that adults struggle with. So being there as a listening ear is going to be really helpful throughout this process as well. Some parents ask, do I need an outside college counselor? We don't have a problem with outside college counselors, but I would say those parents that find the most use in outside college counselors would be the ones that maybe this assisting and maintaining timelines is a little bit of a struggle. Your student may see that it is, they may perceive that it is nagging if the parent is always on top of them. And some independent counselors are willing to do that and be the person that emails the student every day, did you do this? And really itemizes every task list. Philosophically, that's not the approach that we take with counseling. We give them the timelines of how they should be completing things. But if you really feel that your student needs that, someone on top of them every day, that's where that can help. What I would advise, however, is that if you are going to be working with an outside counselor, or if you already are, that you do your research on these individuals. There is a lot of advice given out there, and some of it is not contextualized to St. Francis, and it's really important that you understand context when doing this process. And some of it is just plain wrong, so just be careful. IECA maintains a list of approved counselors that have gone through a rigorous training process if you wanted to do that. What I would say, though, is be careful with how much time you're spending with your counselor, because don't forget that your St. Francis counselor is the one that's responsible for communicating that written evaluation piece down here. And all those conversations that are being had with an independent counselor, that's information that we're not getting as the student's counselor. And as we start to compile that letter, it's really important that that relationship exists over time. So I've already stated the importance of focusing on balance and performance this year. When we talk about it from a grades perspective, trends are something that colleges look at, and the trends doesn't necessarily mean that your student is earning all A's. That's fantastic if your student is earning all A's, that's great, that's a trend. Schools are also looking for trends upwards, and if they see trends downward, that's actually okay too, so long as there's a reason or a rationale for what's going on there. I think colleges just want to understand the story and the context of what's going on. So whether your student is continuing to perform stellarly over the course of their 4 years, or whether they have had a dip or a bump or whatever that looks like, anything can be explained, and all applications have a section for, is there any additional information about your academic performance that you'd like to contribute? So this is the place where things like illness come in, or maybe there was a major loss in the family, or maybe a setback in a sport or something that really impacted athletics. You know, concussions is a thing. So there is room to explain any trends that you feel or the student feels they're uncomfortable with. Just explain that. So colleges are looking at trends, and as long as there's an explanation for any trend, that's okay. We'll talk more about grades overall when it comes to academic match a little bit later on. Leadership and responsibility, and I'd like to talk about responsibility in terms of graduated responsibility. Not every student has to be within their club, the club president or board member. Not every player has to be a team captain. This is really about graduated responsibility and considering where was the student when he or she started this event or this activity, and where is he or she now? Has there been growth, both personally and in terms of their contribution to the team or activity, whatever that might be? Not every student has to have those titles, but they do have to think about how have I grown over time in participation in this activity? And you'll see that connected to the personal, social, intellectual growth as well, is who am I today that is different from the freshman that I entered in as 2.5 years ago? We start asking the students these questions in the springtime, and it's a tough question. So I know when I'm working with my students, I say, you don't have to answer this right now, but start to think about how am I different from the freshman that entered these doors a couple of years ago. That's what I'll ask in their first meeting, and then we'll do a second round of meetings with them as well, and I'll hone more in on that. And hopefully over the summer, they can do a little bit more thought about that question. And then finally, time management, stress management. Junior year, this is really a time to be able to conquer that. It is one of their most academically rigorous years, and so they're really finding that balance of how do I manage my activities with my academics, my honors classes, if I have those, how am I balancing all these things, and how am I going to be able to manage those in the fall on top of college applications? These are things we like them to focus on in junior year. Just for a few reassurances, I think we use numbers a lot for students, and they help. I think students think that some of them are very worried that maybe they won't go to college ever, and the numbers are really against that. When we look at how many colleges there are in the United States, if we were to ask students to name a few colleges, some of them will get to about 20, some maybe 25, some maybe 30, but none of them will get to the over 4,000 schools that are in the United States. And I think that's a really important place to start, is reminding them that there are lots of options out there. We tend to have a list of the ones that we're most familiar with, and many of those are great schools, but there are some incredible schools out there that maybe your students don't know about. In California, relatively, we have fewer colleges than what we would see, say, if we started heading into the Midwest, into the Northeast, into the South. And, you know, geographic region is an important consideration, but there are lots of colleges out there. Most students, not most, many students believe that I can't get into a college. That's not going to happen. Well, the statistics are against that as well. The overall acceptance rate across four-year universities in the United States is 65%. So close to 2/3 of all students will be admitted to a school of their choice, and that's nationally. And so that's not taking into account the high academic standing of California students in general, and more specifically students in the Valley and at St. Francis specifically. So the chances of your student being admitted to a four-year college are good. We'll talk a little bit more about this as well, but if your student wants to go to a four-year college, in almost all cases, we can get your student to a four-year college. The cost piece is another factor that you'll have to weigh in as a family, but college is accessible for all of our students. And then the number of students from St. Francis that actually go to college is significant as well. So we're at a 99.7 rate. And so maybe hopefully you aren't worrying, what happened to that 0.3%? Is my student in that 0.3%? That 0.3% usually represents one or two students, sometimes 3 or 4, that have opted for a gap year. And in those gap years, they're very intentional gap years. They're doing some pretty awesome things during those gap years. We had one student taking a year off to teach martial arts in Asia. We had another student who the college actually opted a gap year for him, and so he'll be starting school in the fall so that he can focus on his research, which is a pretty neat opportunity. So basically most of, or not most, all of our students are doing something pretty neat next year, continuing in their studies in some way or form. So these numbers really help. And we're getting in our earliest admits right now for our senior class. And some of our students that really struggled with wondering if they were going to get into college, they've gotten into colleges already. And my response is, congratulations, you're going to college. And it's such a relief for them because they really didn't think it was possible. But there are lots of options out there for them. So let's talk about those colleges that are out there and how they're going to approach this research. There are a tremendous amount of resources at our website. And so you see it down there, sfhs.com/counseling. And for you as parents, you have your own section here as well. There are resources that you can use, including all of the parent presentations that we do in the evening, any webinars that we've presented. Those are all available to you. There are other resources for students specifically. We have a series of screencasts that we've made over time for students to view on anything from how to register for a community college course to ACT, SAT testing. There's a section on summer enrichment programs if your student is interested in doing one of those. So a lot of resources on our website itself, especially some specifically for parents to use. A big tool that we use, as you've seen probably by now, is Naviance Student. And so when your student logs into Naviance, this is the hub of their application portal, because this is how the high school sends all of our documents, is via Naviance Student. So this is where students request their letters of recommendations from teachers. This is where we maintain the list and how we know which schools to send transcripts and other letters of recommendation and secondary school reports. All of it happens through this hub. There's also some to-do lists that we give students, and then there are some updates on what's coming up. So knowing that a school will be on campus to that a student could sign up for to engage with that college rep. In many cases, that rep will be the one that reads his or her application when it comes in. So this is really the central place that a lot of students will be spending most of their time. When you enter into the college tab and you enter in your college name, it gives you all the details about that college, including some contextual data in comparison to your student versus the rest of St. Francis students that have applied. But we'll spend a little more time in that a little bit later on. But the factors when they start the research that they're considering are tremendous. I mean, there are a number of them. Some of the more popular factors that are being considered when looking at which college to attend are things like major, location, a particular academic program. This one stands out a lot, reputation. I think that's the one where, has anyone heard of that school? You know, we have those conversations with students, but there are so many factors out there that we try and make it a little bit more digestible for students, and we present them with what's called a priority board, which outlines these 12 key factors in determining what kind of school that a student wants to attend. This priority board is an initial conversation that we have with the student, and we ask them to just line up right now, what are your top 3 priorities right now when thinking about college and attending college. That may change from now to March to June to August, next August. So it's just a starting place of what they can consider right now. I think right now a lot of students are thinking things like selectivity, because that has played an increasing role in college admissions overall. But you definitely have some students that are really interested in a school because it has a particular program. That applies to especially students that are interested in maybe a STEM major, or perhaps something really specific like nursing, because there are so few four-year colleges that offer direct entry nursing programs. Some of your students know that they want to go to a small school, or they want to go to this huge school that you know, everyone goes to the football games on Saturdays and paints their bodies blue. Like, students sometimes have an idea of that. Right now, the geographic location is an interesting one. I think they're all assuming that you want them to stay in California and close to home, and that may be the case. We do ask that you open that idea, the idea of them going out of state up. As a school, we flip-flop back and forth from 51-49% in-state versus out-of-state. I think this past year we're 51% in-state. So a lot of students are going out of California, but geographic location is definitely something we talk about. Some students want to continue their Catholic education, which is fantastic, and we have some great relationships with Catholic schools that understand the kinds of students they'll be receiving from St. Francis. So we use this priority board in our conversations with juniors to kind of start to have that conversation. What we do ask, and we've been asking since last year of students, is to get themselves on college campuses. That's a really important part of this whole process. And right now, it still doesn't have to be because I'm considering this college. It has to be because you're thinking about what are the qualities of physical space and place that the student enjoys about a particular college. So if a student is going up to the North Bay to Dominican College or going to the Coast Guide to UC Santa Cruz, what are the attributes of this space that are appealing to me? I wouldn't underestimate the importance of how a student feels on a campus, because they're going to be living there for 4 years. Hopefully within 4 years, they're going to be living there. And so they have to, it has to click. I liken it to their experience when they came to Shadow a couple years ago at St. Francis. When we asked students what about their choice to attend St. Francis, many of them say it was that Shadow experience that sold it. So I think this is something that an experience that they can resonate with is being on campus and saying, can I see myself here? How far are the dorms from the classrooms? What is the dining hall experience like? Those kinds of things are really important in this whole process. And there are lots of places that you as a family can be going either on a weekday afternoon or even on a Saturday, because we are in the school year. Many colleges and universities that you can see. All the blue ones here are four-year universities, and then there's always the option of community college, which is increasingly an option for many students because of their direct pipelines to the UCCSU system, in some cases with guaranteed transfer agreements. The added bonus of a community college system is many municipalities and community college districts are actually starting to offer the first or second year of community college for free for students. So talk about saving a buck. That could be a really incredible option for somebody. But again, right now, they don't have to say, I'm going to this college because I want to know if I want to attend. That helps, but really just getting on campus and seeing what the feel is like. When they start narrowing down that list of colleges that they may be interested in, we like to talk about academic match, which is a really important part of the conversation. And so how do you determine academic match? Part of that is thinking about where do I fit it relative to the students that are attending this school. So near every college will produce or make available what's called the freshman profile. So for this year, it would be the class of 2022, I get lost up in the years, class of 2022 freshman class at a particular college. Where did the middle 50% of our students perform from a GPA standpoint and from a test score standpoint, so ACT or SAT? The GPA one's kind of hard because there is no national standard for GPAs for colleges when they present that freshman profile. So whereas a college might say the middle 50% of our students had a GPA between 3.4 and 3.8, well, that means very different things at very different schools, because some schools have more honors and AP classes, some schools weight or don't weight their GPA, some schools count some classes towards their GPA not. So there's no real standard measure of that. So the GPA indicator is a little bit more challenging to use. But what is a little bit more helpful, not entirely like seals the deal, but is more helpful is understanding test score, because that is a standard thing across the board. So when we're talking about match, we look at how did the middle 50% of the students in the freshman class at that college perform. So saying this group here, 25% of the students performed better than that group, and 25% performed a little bit less good than, less well than that group. This is really what determines the academic match section. And so let me give you an example of that. If we're talking about a school like Loyola Marymount in Southern California, they're mid-50 for their SAT on a 1600 scale. 50% of the students, of the mid-pack of their students, scored between a 1220 on their SAT and a 1400. So if your student is someone that scored a 1310, He or she is right in the middle of that pool. And so they are what's called a possible admit at a match school from an academic perspective. Had your student scored, say, an 11-10, then LMU would become an unpredictable or a little bit of a reach school for him or her. Had your student scored 15-20, well, now we're a little bit more of a confident match school. And notice the language that I'm using with this, because language is a really important part of this entire process. Sometimes they are, sometimes you may be used to hearing the terms target, reach, and safety. While those terms, we understand the basis for them, I think it's really important to start thinking about the terms that you're using. We like to analogize our confident match schools to relationships. If you were thinking in terms of marriage, like, do you really want to marry your safety? I mean, that's kind of a hard thing to stomach. So we kind of use that language as well when we're talking about colleges, is we want these to be confident match schools if your student is performing better than that mid-50. So we use that term confident match. Also, from the reach perspective, I think reach is still kind of a usable term, but we also say unpredictable. And unpredictable actually masks what actually might be predictable, which for some schools, especially that are sub 20% admit rates, it might be a little bit more predictable than we're willing to admit, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But back to this particular example, this student scoring a 13-10 is right in the middle of that pack of the mid 50% for LMU. Now, there are some schools where you can look at lots of data within the scattergrams alongside your student. So this is the scattergram for St. Francis High School and LMU. So you can see where the student fits within the general pack of students that applied. So each one of these marks represents a student from St. Francis that applied to this particular school. It tells you whether they applied as part of an early program or a regular decision. And you'll see that this particular student is kind of right in that range of target or match school right in here. We would call students over here being in the confident match section. So you do see a lot of check marks there. And then the students kind of down here in the purple section, would be those that are in the unpredictable / reach section. Now, this is not a science. So there are many factors as part of the holistic review process that go into this, but just kind of gives you a general sense of where the student fits within that model. When we're looking at some schools, especially those that are very highly selective or ultra highly selective schools, sometimes those scores aren't enough to determine their admittance to a particular school. So in terms of Stanford, their mid-50 is 1420 SAT to a 1570 SAT. You'll notice that the whole range is unpredictable in this case, because at a school with the kind of selectivity that Stanford has, they're pooling for very different reasons, and their admissions model takes into account a lot of factors. Just for a little bit of context setting, and I think you may have heard this from one of my presentations before, Stanford, 75% of the students that were denied admission to Stanford earned a 1600 on the SAT. So it's a perfect score on the SAT. So some schools are just unpredictable across the board, and it's important that you have those conversations. This is not to discourage students from applying to those schools that have those sub 20% admit rates, but I think it's important that you have the conversation and say, sure, you want to apply to one of those schools? Yes, but let's limit that to 2, maybe 3 reach or unpredictable schools overall. But let's get back to this model here. For the Stanford model, we've got a student A scoring a 1290, student B scoring a 1480, and then student C scoring a 1600. It really is unpredictable, even if you've got the perfect GPA, the perfect test score. So just considering that whenever you're applying to schools that have these lower rates. This is becoming a much, well, not more important, but equally important conversation when we're thinking about match, and that is financial match. Your students are looking at it mostly from the perspective of, hey, can I get in? That's part 1 of the question of college admissions, can I get in? Part 2 is, can I afford it? And that's becoming more and more important to a lot of families, because honestly, you're the one that's footing the bill. And regardless of your family's income, whether it be 0 expected family contribution or 500,000 expected family contribution, the truth is also that every family wants to pay as little as possible for college. I mean, I think that's important. Regardless of our financial setting, we would like to be able to, get some merit aid, get some sort of aid to lower the price of college. So financial match is going to be an important thing. I'm just going to touch really lightly on financial aid because we'll do a little bit more about that next school year as you're starting to actually do the applications to this. But I do want to give you insight into what that looks like from a matching perspective. In broad brushstrokes, financial aid encompasses 3 kinds of aid. Merit-based aid, which are scholarships and grants that usually the school or some outside organization is providing based on a student's performance. Need-based grants, which is money that does not have to be paid back. Usually that's based on a family's income. And then loans, which most families are made available to most families through the institution and sometimes subsidized through the government as well. There are some great tools out there. The cost of attendance and the net price calculators are all federally mandated by colleges to have on their websites. But let's talk about what financial match looks like. So I'm going to pull back up LMU and their range here. And so when we looked at academic match, we saw a student that had that 1210, in this case, that would be student B, being in the possible admit section. When we look at it from a financial aid perspective, match changes a little bit here. So we've got student A scoring a 980, student B scoring a 1210, and student C scoring a 1410. What's important about this one is that if we look at it from a scattergram perspective, here's how those students would line up. You've got your student A, student B, and student C. When it comes to merit-based grants, so dollars that are issued to students based on their academic performance, the primary beneficiary of these dollars is going to be the students in this green circle, so student C. Any dollars that are left over from that merit-based pool for student C's will then be offered to those in the yellow circle for student B. And by then, between the green and the yellow circles, there's really not money left over for anyone that is admitted within that red circle, which is student A. So even though student A, you'll see there are some check marks within that red circle, even though student A may be admitted to that school, he or she may not be eligible for any type of aid or grants from that college, even though they're admitted. So that's why financial match is becoming an important thing, is your student may be admitted to a particular school, but the amount of dollars that come with that admittance may not match what your family is willing and able to pay for that particular school. So that's becoming a more important factor, and we're trying to educate students on that, but the more conversations you can have with them about financial fit is really going to be helpful in that conversation. Sometimes the solution is thought of as just being, well, as long as I send my student to a public school, so UC or CSU, that will help limit the cost. Right now, for a UC, just for comparative sake, total package per year is about $36,000, including tuition and room and board for a UC school. That is a pretty good deal considering the cost of colleges and considering that tuition at some four-year schools is, just tuition alone is anywhere from $45,000 to $60,000 a year. That's significant. But what's different here is that private schools have the option to issue a few more grants. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to be able to issue a grant of $43,000 in every single case. That's not, we have to be realistic that colleges just don't have that kind of money. But they are able to give a lot more grants than public schools are. So when all is taken into account, and if a student is applying to a private school that is an academic match or even is a confident match, they may be able to bring that price down to something a little bit more comparable to a public state school. So keep that in mind. Private colleges have a little bit more flexibility, particularly if your student is outperforming the general population of that school. Other considerations for this are, of course, community college, where you can save the first 2 years tuition. Other considerations are international schools. In the English system, their degrees are issued within 3 years. So you're only paying for 3 years worth of college versus 4, and they're actually quite affordable. We've spoken to some English colleges who their total package per year, including room and board, is somewhat closer to $25,000 to $28,000 a year, which is already lower than the UC. And that's only for 3 years, as opposed to 4 years in the United States system. And in some cases, some of your students may be there a little bit longer than 4 years. The average amount of time to complete the degree has already inched up to 5 years. So thinking about that in terms of what is the graduation rate like from the school? And that leads me to, we're going to skip this video for a sec. It's just a really short video, and you can click on it when you actually download the presentation. When you think about those grants, they're just larger at private schools, so they can bring those dollars a little bit closer to the students. But I wanted to bring this up about financial match again, is few people really look at the graduation rates of schools. And this is a really important one, because while you might be saving a little bit of money on the one end with a college that your student is attending, it's important to note that the graduation rate has to match that. Because if you're spending less per year on college, but it's a college where your student is going to be there for 6 years, did you really spend, did you really save money? And that's an important conversation to have. What is the graduation rate like for a particular school? And some of those 6-year graduation rates are disturbingly low. So keep those kinds of things in mind. Also keep in mind retention rates. So your student will be going off to, in many cases, a 4-year university. Schools do publish their retention rate. What percentage of their students are returning for their sophomore year at that school? You've got schools like Santa Clara that have retention rates of something near 96%. That is a significant, retention rate. Most colleges maintain retention rates closer to 70%. So keep those things in mind. Other things to keep in mind: what are the support services that I get? Like, how much bang am I getting for my buck? That's a really important piece. What are the wraparound services, both from healthcare to mental health support to tutoring? What are those things that are available at the school? What are the job placement rates? I mean, we've talked about return on investment a lot lately in college admissions. Is my money really going into an investment? Are the students that are attending this or graduating from this school being placed either in a job or, as you see next, in graduate school? What are the alumni engagement look like? And some of this information you can find on the website directly or through the college scorecard. So these are important details that you can be having conversations with your student about. So they might love the idea of this school, but you as the investor have to consider some of those additional factors and help them understand why those are important factors to consider. Feel free to ask questions if you have them along the way too. College admission testing. This is really prominent, and some of you are wondering, when should my student be taking a test? We hold off on this a lot because most students, under most circumstances, should not be taking any SAT, official SAT or ACT, until the spring of their junior year at the earliest. Now, if your student just took the, say, November SAT or is scheduled for, or December SAT, should I say, or is scheduled for the ACT this weekend, that's okay. It's not the end of the world. But really, most students should be taking it in the spring of their junior year. That's because you want to get as much curriculum under your belt as possible, and there really is no net benefit to taking an exam earlier rather than later. In some very limited circumstances, taking an exam too early may actually be detrimental to your students' college prospects. That's at a limited number of schools, but keep that in mind. Some students think that, or families think that if they take the exam, that'll provide a good baseline of data for them to say, okay, so I performed here now, here's where I need to get to and how I get there. That's what the PSAT is for. It is directly normed to the SAT, so that the PSAT scores, which should be coming out next week, will tell you, had you taken the SAT in October of this year, this is what you would have scored. That's the baseline data your family should be using to determine eligibility for college and where the student should be working towards in their official tests. Don't use the official test as a baseline. You want to limit that testing to 1 or 2 tests. In some limited circumstances, 3. I definitely would not advise beyond 3 sittings. And if you came to the presentation by Bruce Reed earlier this year, he would also say, you shouldn't be studying for both of these exams. You take the practicing test for the SAT, you take the practice ACT, and the student, that whichever test he or she feels more comfortable with, start studying for that exam. Otherwise, you're diluting your experience in those exams. And the first exams really shouldn't happen before March. Again, if your student is registered, that's okay. But take a look at some of the handouts that we have, because the testing timeline does look a little bit different based on PSAT scores. And so you can find that on our website as well. Say your student scored this score, what should their suggested timeline be? We have that information available on our website just for you to look at. The only thing that you'll see up here that they maybe might want to take are SAT subject tests. Very few colleges are requiring them. There are some holdouts that still require them, including schools like Georgetown. Students that are going into a STEM field may be more, maybe in a better position if they are taking subject tests, particularly the Math 2 subject test and a science exam. And then there's AP tests that are here as well. So this is a typical junior testing schedule, but you can look at more detailed ones on our website. Some families have questions about what's the real difference. Well, just so you know, they are equally accepted by all colleges, either the SAT or ACT. So really, it's whatever the student's preference is for an exam. ACT has overtaken SAT as the most taken exam, and that's a trend that's growing. SAT is trying to put up a fight, but really ACT is becoming much more popular. But really, it's whatever your students' preferences are for. This is a really simple slide to kind of highlight what the differences are between those exams. Again, this presentation will be available online for you to look a little bit more detail. So here's where we're going to jump the gun. This information is a lot more relevant in the fall, but we thought that you should have it now so that you knew what was coming up. And so there are a few slides about what this process actually looks like. I do like to show this slide just to set a little bit of context of what's happening in the admissions world. Before this presentation that you're looking at, I actually did a overall context presentation to all parents before they broke off with their individual counselor. And I talked about what's happening in the admissions world and kind of the admissions mania and the arms race. And that's one of the reasons why we asked families to read Bruni's book, Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be. Very important to understand what's happening in the college world, especially within the world of admissions and what's happening. So we know that colleges are trying to be a little bit more selective because selectivity is often equated with quality, which is a really poor correlation. But how do you make your college more selective, therefore more desirable? Well, you have to lower your admit rate, and there are two ways to lower your admit rate. You could admit fewer students, which is one way overall, meaning reducing the number of seats that are available. But most colleges can't do that because each seat, each bottom in the seat accounts for tuition, so you can't do that. So you can increase the number of applicants, and that means that therefore increases the number of students that are denied. And so what colleges have done is previously the pool started around here in the applicants section, where students, along with their counselors, were finding the colleges that were great fits for them. And from those applicant pool, that's where these colleges were choosing from. They admitted students based on their criteria, and most of those students enrolled. And that's called a yield rate, the number of students that are admitted that actually enroll. What's been added is these top two layers, where a student will now visit a school or go on a college tour and fill out one of those postcards with their address. And now we've got a new pool of demonstrated interest students who I can market to say, hey, you should apply. And they're kind of asking that question without even understanding the student's academic context. But even more so, that gray circle at the top is the mass marketing, where now they're not even waiting for students to step foot on their campus. They're just sending mass amounts of material. So because your student has now taken a PSAT twice, they are probably receiving a plethora of emails, of print materials saying, hey, apply, apply, apply. Know at this point that the colleges don't know very much about your student. The only thing that they know is that your student is the kind to take a practice test because they took the PSAT. They know that your student attends St. Francis High School, a college preparatory school in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is a high college attending area. So they know they've already got a captive audience by sending materials. They really are trying to up their number of applicants. And so starting in July, your students are gonna start to get a barrage of emails saying, apply now, apply now, apply now, without really understanding your student's context. So I would just help your student understand that just because they're receiving material doesn't necessarily mean that the college is saying, I want you at my school. I want your application, yes, but I want you at my school, not always is the case. So keep that in mind as you go through this process. Also keep in mind that while there is a movement, or at least a perceived movement towards applying to more schools, we're still looking at a pretty significant percentage of students who are applying to 6 or fewer colleges. we put a limit of 10 college applications for our students, and we calculate it a little bit differently because we count the UCs, all campuses, as one, and we count all the CSUs as one. So the actual average might be a little bit over 10 if you don't combine UC CSUs. But we try and limit that. And the reason we do that is something that I like to call application dilution. The more schools you're applying to, the less time you can spend on each individual application. And that's a thing. When students take into consideration that their application is actually going to get very little time seen by a college representative, they want to make sure that they're putting their best foot forward and that they really understand that college and what that college is looking for before they start that application process. I'm going to speed through a couple of these upcoming slides because we're going to run out of time here, but let's just get to that. That idea of demonstrated interest, there is a way for your student to show interest in the college. That primary way is to get on that campus, fill out that card, go on the tour. That's a really important way. But I highlight this slide because in the middle, the best way for a student to demonstrate interest is to show that they know that this college is a great fit. They know that they're an academic match. They know that they are a social match for that particular school. That's the best way to show demonstrated interest. So even though you go on campus, a student really has to understand that place in that space, understand that school's mission, understand what they're trying to accomplish at that school. That's the best kind of matching that can happen there. And so students need to know that. Even though they might be hearing from colleges, really they should be able to articulate why that college is the best fit for them. When we get to the fall, you're going to see a couple of different types of applications that can be used. All 23 schools in the Cal State system, from San Francisco State, San Jose State, to Cal Poly Pomona, San Diego State, they all use the same application system. It's called Cal State Apply. It does not require any transcripts, essays, or letters of recommendation. It only requires your student to fill out an application, which is akin to a job application, and your test scores are sent to that school. They do a pretty objective review of each student for their application, but it is one application system. Some students will apply to one of the 9 undergraduate campuses of the UC system. Same thing, they don't require letters of recommendation, but they do require essays, which they call personal insight questions. Most college applications will be handled through the Common App. And we are a Common App Naviance school, so if the Common App is an option for an application, that is the application the students must use. There is also the Coalition application, which is kind of growing in the number of colleges that accept that, but most of those schools will be Common App and Coalition, so if Common App is an option, students are to use Common App. And then there are many state schools that have their own application, and then there are the aberrations like Georgetown that likes to still receive things in paper, but keeping that in mind, that as a student is going through this process, one of the reasons why we limit it as well is managing these different types of applications. It's a lot of work, and so having the time to be able to do those effectively requires a tremendous amount of time management. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this this slide here, because we'll talk more about that when we meet in the fall of senior year, when we come back as senior parents in August. But there are different types of application plans, and the ones I want to highlight here are regular decision versus early decision and early action programs. Regular decision applications are typically due anywhere from December 1st through March. That is historically where when most applications were submitted, but there has been over the last 20 years a growth in early programs where if a student applies by, say, November 1st, November 15th, they are able to receive a decision, an admissions decision, by Christmas time at latest. That is growing, and a number of students are taking advantage of that. You will see that admission rates are higher in the early pools, but you have to be careful with that number because the early admission program admission rates are higher because this kind of student applying to that school is a much more of an academic match than in the regular pool. So again, we'll talk more about that in the springtime and again in the fall. But if your student is a good academic match for that school, then an early program might be within their best interests. So we'll talk more about that later. How are their applications reviewed? I mentioned the CSU system, which does an objective review, which is just looking at the transcript, looking at the test scores, and making a decision about eligibility. So sometimes it's that clear cut. You'll get that from a lot of the state schools, a lot of the state public schools. Most private schools and the UCs will do a holistic review, which takes into account the transcript and the test scores, but also other things like the writing samples, letters of recommendation, extracurricular activities, and in some cases an interview. So most of the schools our students are applying to are doing holistic review. We do have a good swath of students that go to the CSU system that are just doing it based on minimum eligibility. But this is why it's important for them to see this as a reflective process, because these essays are an important part of this whole process. What are they looking for? What are colleges looking for when they do holistic review? Lots of things. One of our Santa Clara reps, she liked to put it into these 5 PowerPoints: program, performance, potential, participation, and personality. I'm going to show you a couple of models of things that college reps have said that they like to look at. But one thing I do want to highlight is when we ask college reps across the board, what are the things that they're looking for? You can see they're pretty specific about what they want to see in a college application. The most important thing that they're looking at, the 2 most important things, are grades in their courses. Now, you might ask, what is the difference between grades in all courses versus college prep courses? Well, remember that St. Francis is a college preparatory school, so nearly all of our courses, except for PE, are college preparatory courses. So this doesn't really apply to us, but they really look at grades. Now, that's there's a huge caveat to that one, if they really look at grades. By they really look at grades does not mean that your student has to have earned all A's every semester, every class. What they're looking at is grades are important to us from the sense of, do the grades of your student match the grades of the students in our freshman class? That's what they mean when they say grades in all courses. Is your student an academic match? And then you'll see after grades, it's the admission test scores and then strength of curriculum. Again, your students are coming from a college preparatory school, so their curriculum overall is seen as more advanced than that of the general pool. And some will have a massive honors. Some honors and AP courses as well. You'll see there's a huge jump from test scores, grades, and classes to the next important factor, which is essay or writing example. And then we'll come back to this one, the extracurricular activities down here at the 3.6%. But you can see where those are important. Another view of what they see as important there. These are just models for how they do holistic review. GPA and transcript, how they view those. Each college can calculate their own GPA. The UC and CSU system only look at your the student's sophomore and junior year grades within their college preparatory classes. But everyone else calculates their GPAs and counts things differently. So your St. Francis GPA might not necessarily match the GPA that your college is reviewing the student's performance on. So a little bit about that. And then that academic rigor piece is really important, because sometimes students say, well, I have to take as many honors classes as possible. That's true, but you have to also consider that those courses that are being taken also come at a cost, right? Because if we're talking about an AP class, that is meant to model a college level course, and sometimes 16-year-olds are not ready for college level coursework. So while stacking up the honors and AP classes might sound like a great idea, if it comes at the cost of the GPA overall, that could be a deciding factor for when a college is really considering a student for admission. We've talked about things that they're looking at. I try and stay away from the word passion, even though it's up here on demonstrate passion. It's really about the kinds of involvement that students are doing. Has it shown growth? That's the really critical piece of the holistic review in terms of extracurricular activities. And so when we look at extracurricular activities, you wonder then, so my student has played softball for 10 years. Was that a big waste of time? I wouldn't say that, because I think athletics and club performance and drama, band, all these things are incredible experiences for the students that are able to demonstrate growth, but most colleges are not admitting students for those activities that they're doing. So that's why when we've had the conversation over the last several years, we've encouraged students to do things that are meaningful to them and things where they're able to grow within that activity, because the extracurricular activity itself is not a major factor in admission decision. For some athletes or for some drama students, like it is, but that percentage of students is super low. So just be careful when you're thinking about why the student is doing that activity. It's not that they can't continue that activity in college, but colleges really aren't weighing that as a significant factor in admissions. Our letters overall will come from both teachers and counselors, and we give students very clear deadlines on how to make that happen, and we instruct them on how to request those letters. And so that'll happen a little bit later this spring, and we'll give your students a lot more detail about that. As for next steps, you've got a parent questionnaire that is coming your way via SurveyMonkey, and we ask that you do that. It gives a little bit of context information for your family and the college experience in your family and your circle. We ask that you submit that by January 31st, so keep an eye on your inbox for that. It is by SurveyMonkey so that you can save and return to it, so if you're not able to finish it in one sitting. There's a much more in-depth parent survey that we ask in the springtime, and that asks a little bit more about, what is it that your student loves? What is your perspective as a parent? And that's a really helpful survey, and it's important for us to be able to construct a written evaluation. You've got the parent resources that we outlined at on the counseling website that you can always use. And then just so you know what's coming up, we've got our junior college workshop on February 28th, where we will have representatives from colleges talking about different topics, from UC-CSU to international colleges to community colleges, financial aid, lots of different topics that you can choose from, followed by South Bay Case Studies on April 4th, which is where we we co-host with our diocesan schools. We hosted the last 2 years, and so Bellarmine will host for the next 2 years. We invite juniors and one of their parents to sit in with a rep to actually review case studies of students that have applied to their colleges and get the admission representative's perspective on those students. And then also in the spring, we'll have junior parent coffee talks, where we'll invite you to come for a series of days just to ask any questions you have about the process, where we are, and that information will come out in the spring. So I want to thank you for participating in this webinar. The recording will be available on the website this week, as will the slides. If you have any questions, my best advice to you is to, number one, send your student to ask the question. I think it's important to start to get them used to being held accountable for finding out information about college. And it gives you a method to have a conversation with them. When you say, I'm not sure about this, will you ask your counselor this? Now they have to go ask their counselor, and then they have to bring that answer home to you so that you guys can have that conversation. So that's your best bet. You're also always welcome to give us a call, give us an email, and we will try to answer those questions as well. So thank you so much for being here. I hope this was helpful, and hope you have a great holiday season, and we will see you again in the spring. Thank you so much.